Chapter 5. The Spirit of Liberty. Ruth signed up for job interviews with every firm that didn't bar women. When she interviewed with the New York law firm of Paul, Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, it was obvious to her that the partner who interviewed her, Lloyd Garrison, wasn't much interested in what she had to say. After she'd barely said 2 sentences, he hired her on the spot. She soon learned the reason. The law firm had already decided they wanted a woman. Ruth was the Harvard woman with the highest grades, so they'd already decided to hire her. End of story. No need to waste time on an interview. The custom was for firms to make full-time job offers to its summer associates at the end of the summer. Ruth believed that her work that summer at the firm was up to their usual standards. She was surprised and disappointed when she was not offered a job. Later, she found out that the firm had hired a full-time female associate, so she supposed they no longer needed her. The woman they hired, Polly Murray, was a feminist who worked hard for women's rights. Later, she and Polly became friends. When Ruth applied to transfer to Columbia Law School, Dean Warren of Columbia accepted her and welcomed her. Soon, the word went around the Columbia Law campus that the smartest person on the East Coast was transferring in, so everyone could anticipate dropping down 1 rank. In her new class at Columbia, Ruth was one of 12 women. Her classmates viewed her as serious and smart, a woman who did things with a minimum of fuss. She was extraordinarily intelligent, but low-key and reserved, said Marie Garibaldi, a Columbia classmate who went on to become a state Supreme Court justice. She was thoughtful and deliberate in her responses to professors' questions, but she was never arrogant about her intelligence. Others found her aloof and reserved. One classmate said, "Due to the demands on her time, I don't think anyone became really close friends with Ruth." After all, with Marty working in a major Wall Street law firm and eager to make partner, she was mostly responsible for the home and Jane, as well as her studies. At Columbia, as at Harvard, Ruth pulled it off. Her first round of grades put her at the top of the class, and she was offered a place on Columbia's Law Review, giving her the unusual distinction of having made law review at both Harvard and Columbia. She signed up for Herbert Wechsler's noontime seminar in federal courts in the federal system, considered one of the most difficult in the law school. She was the star student. Wechsler had a habit of asking his students long, complicated questions. When it was Ruth's turn to respond, she paused before answering, then gave an equally long, complicated answer. Then, after another pause, she would politely add factors Wechsler had left out. With graduation approaching and time to look for a job, Ruth signed up for interviews. Major law firms posted sign-up sheets for students who wanted to interview with their firm. Only 2 firms invited her to interview. Her mother-in-law had given her a black interview suit, and when she wore it, she felt she looked very much like a young lawyer. She was disappointed when neither firm offered her a job. In the 50s, traditional law firms were just beginning to turn around on hiring Jews, Ruth explained later, but to be a woman, a Jew, and a mother to boot, that combination was a bit too much. She remarked that after being shunned by so many law firms, she looked in the mirror to see if she had 2 heads. Some of the reasons given for refusing to hire women seemed downright silly and even ironic to Ruth. For example, United States attorneys' offices refused to hire women as prosecutors. The excuse was that women were too soft to be able to confront hardened criminals. But Legal Aid, the organization most often entrusted with defending the accused, was full of women, even though the defense lawyer was positioned more closely to the hardened criminals. Ruth concluded that the difference was that legal aid lawyers were paid paltry salaries compared to prosecutors. Other excuses were simply annoying. One that Ruth heard was, "We hired a woman at this firm once, and she was dreadful." Never mind, plenty of male hires hadn't worked out either. Others said they wanted to feel comfortable enough in the workplace so they could just kick off their shoes if they wanted, and they didn't feel they could do that with women around. The most interesting and prestigious positions available to new law school graduates were judicial clerkships lasting a year or 2, and they always went to the very top students. Professor Albert Sachs, then a Harvard law professor and later dean of the law school, recommended Ruth as a clerk to Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. Justice Frankfurter had been the first Supreme Court justice to hire an African-American law clerk, so both Professor Sachs and Ruth had high hopes that Justice Frankfurter would hire her. A legend, which has now been debunked, was that after Justice Frankfurter received the call from Professor Sachs recommending Ruth, he asked whether she wore skirts and then said, "I can't stand girls in pants." He may not have made the snarky comment, but he refused to hire Ruth. He admitted to being impressed with her academic credentials, but he said he wasn't prepared to break the tradition of hiring only men as clerks. Columbia professor Gerald Gunther, who had been Ruth's professor in a course on federal courts and who played an active role in helping Columbia's top students secure judicial clerkships, took Ruth on as a special case. He called every judge on the Second Circuit and the Eastern and Southern Districts of New York. He recommended her to judges as a brilliant student who demonstrated extraordinary intellectual capacities. He described her as modest, thoughtful, penetrating, fair, and open-minded. The answer? No. Even judges open to taking a chance on a woman were frightened of hiring the mother of a young child. What if the child was sick? How could Ruth work the long hours often expected of a clerk? What about Sundays and weekends? It would seem that Ruth's grades and academic performance would have alleviated these concerns. After all, if she managed to earn top grades in 2 top law schools as the mother of a toddler, why wouldn't she be able to perform the demanding duties of a clerk? The judge Ruth most admired and most wished to work for was Learned Hand, an extraordinarily influential judge. Appointed to the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit by Calvin Coolidge, he was known for his rulings in the field of civil liberties. Her mentors tried to get her a clerkship with Judge Hand, but he declined, saying he had a foul mouth and he didn't want a woman around because he didn't want to have to curb his swearing. Professor Gunther finally got her a clerkship with Judge Palmieri of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York by means of a promise and a threat. A Columbia Law graduate, then working in a Wall Street law firm, promised that if Ruth didn't work out, he would step in and take over. The threat was this. Gunther told Judge Palmieri, "And if you don't give her a chance, Columbia will never again send you another law clerk." The combination of threat and promise did the trick. Judge Palmieri hired Ruth for a 2-year clerkship. Gunther knew Ruth would not fail, and she didn't. To prove herself, she worked harder than any other law clerk in the building, staying late whenever it was necessary, coming into work on Saturdays and bringing work home. Shortly after she began work, she was in the courtroom when 2 lawyers were arguing over the merits of her particular motion. After hearing arguments, Judge Palmieri was about to rule on the motion when Ruth passed him a note asking if he could delay ruling because she believed there was a Supreme Court case directly on point. Ruth turned out to be right. Both lawyers had overlooked the case, and the judge hadn't thought of it. Ruth had saved Judge Palmieri from error. He was duly impressed. While working with Judge Palmieri, she learned the need for flexibility and the truth of one of Learned Hand's famous sayings. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. At one point, she felt absolutely sure she knew the answer to a question. Does a federal district court have authority to transfer a case, although the transferee court lacked both subject matter and personal jurisdiction? She and Judge Palmieri discussed the question and came to the same conclusion. The court was powerless to do anything but dismiss the case. The Second Circuit affirmed the dismissal on appeal. The case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court reversed, saying that Ruth and her judge got it wrong. The Supreme Court explained that we have only one federal court system, so dismissal would not be appropriate because the litigants would have no other venue for their grievances. Many times over the coming years, Ruth reflected on the Supreme Court's analysis, and she came to understand her error. As it turned out, Learned Hand and Judge Palmieri lived near each other, so Palmieri often drove Judge Hand home from court, with Ruth riding in the back seat. Judge Hand would swear, sing indelicate songs, and say whatever popped into his head, however crude. "How can you carry on this way with me in the car, and yet you wouldn't consider me to be your law clerk?" Ruth asked once. "Young lady," Judge Hand responded, "I'm not looking you in the face." By the end of Ruth's 2-year clerkship, Judge Palmieri was so impressed with her that the very next year he hired another woman.